9th. Today is the 9th of February, 2022, Abhayagiri Monastery, half moon, Wanpra, the waxing half moon, 1 week from Magha Puja. I've been doing a fair number of readings on metta, but also there was a few readings on tying all these things together. Metta, impermanence, Buddha-nusati. Buddha-nusati, of course, and Asubha-kammatthana. Buddha-nusati is a thread that runs through all of this because it all comes from the Buddha. All these teachings come from the Buddha. Everything we have here comes from the Buddha. So Buddha-nusati is a thread that runs through all of this. And I've been appreciating that book, Bloom. Talks by Ajahn Sona, some collected talks by Ajahn Sona, and the talks in the latter half of the book, there's a few of them that are from a retreat that he gave in 2014 and that I was at. It's when I was looking after Pacific Hermitage for 3 months, and part of that 3 months was a 10-day, the annual Pacific Hermitage retreat at Birken. So I was there and was there for some of those talks, and it was nice to be reminded of them. It was a very memorable retreat. It was actually an interesting retreat because I thought I was going to have to lead it, and I didn't feel qualified or ready to lead it, and then Ajahn Sona spontaneously led it. So that was nice and much appreciated. And it's interesting how we can listen to Dhamma teachings in the past, and having listened to so many teachings or had so many meditation experiences, and be reminded of experiences we had in the past, just how long we've been at this, and how many teachings we've heard, and have we remembered them? Have we internalized them? So one of the qualities of the Dhamma that's needed is not just to listen to the Dhamma, but to reflect on it and internalize it. Sometimes for internalizing it, we have to be reminded of things we may have heard already. We just have to be reminded over and over and over again. We have to do the practice over and over and over again. Something I think about quite a lot, reflect on quite a lot, is just impermanence as a practice, reflection on impermanence. So not just reflection on death, that isn't just death contemplation, that's the impermanence which most of us, that there's a great fear of that type of impermanence, the fear of death, of that type of ending, the ending of the body. So there is that type of impermanence, but there's also just the impermanence of all conditioned things. Not just the body, but any buildings in the monastery. I like to reflect on what is this building going to be like 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 1,000 years from now, what's going to be here. When they were building this building, there was a foundation. In 2013, they started building this building. There was a foundation by 2014. And I remember looking at the foundation of this building thinking that's a peek into the future. That's 500 years from now. That's what it's going to look like. There'll just be a foundation 1,000 years from now. So all of us will be either gone or who knows? Who knows what things will be like 1,000 years from now? I find this reflection helpful for lessening that sense of importance we tend to give to present events in the world. It's just always changing. Things are getting worse. It's so bad. Things are getting worse. Yeah, but if it gets worse, it'll get better. Well, things are getting better. It's going to be great. Don't worry. Well, if things get better, they're just going to get worse again. So that helps us to, this is the nature of samsara. One monk said that trying to get everything right in samsara is like trying to arrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. That it's a sinking ship. So to not put too much effort into it. And I very much enjoyed the Q&A session live with Ajahn Ñāṇiko from Thailand, and that was very uplifting for me. He's had a long history with this place, of course, having been the guest monk when I came here, and we figured out that not only was he the first bhikkhu that I met in person, but also the first bhikkhu that Sandra met as well around that same time, 2001. I was also, during winter retreat, something I do sometimes is organize file cabinets and slowly go through papers and throw out things that can be thrown out. And I discovered some old guest books from that time and found Sandra's signature in that guest book from 2001. I think she was living in Sacramento at the time. I didn't sign it. I didn't sign the guest book. But I did notice my own handwriting when a later guest book, I think it was 2002, I decided to organize the guest book a little bit, and because it was just like a book with lines, and it wasn't, so I put like name and date and comments or whatever, and did these like ruler lines, and noticed I wrote that on every page in the guest book. I took the time to organize the guest book, and I remember doing that. And that was back when we had the little house, which there isn't a trace of now. It's hard to even know where it was. So those of you who've been coming here for more than a few years will know about the old house that was there. It was destroyed in 2016, I believe. They took the excavator and they destroyed the house. And some people were sad to see that house go. We used to hang out on these green chairs on the front porch. Some people will remember that. There's a video. I was in Thailand when the house got destroyed. I was in Thailand for 1.5 years during that time. But there was a little video, and I watched it more recently, that somebody took of the house being destroyed, and then the excavator is destroying the house, and there's people with hoses keeping the dust down. And then once the house is finally totally destroyed, then you can hear Ajahn Kasapo in the background, and he said, "Where's my house?" Sort of understated humor. Your house just got totally destroyed by a backhoe. But yeah, that house was, and then of course they paved over with sidewalks, and that house was roughly where, like the bell tower now is, one edge of the house was about right there. And the office buildings were like behind the house. So that was the past, and now it's gone. Where did it go? And then we used to have midnight tea in that house when I first came here. And there was carpet in the house. And we had midnight tea, and there was just like 5 or 6 of us in there. And the kitchen was there. So you just went in and had midnight tea right next to the kitchen. And where is that? Where is that now? So these things are always changing. And not only do people take birth and go eventually to death, but situations take birth and go to death, and whole monasteries take birth and then go to death eventually. I remember being on a 6-week tudong in Thailand, in the north of Thailand, and we came across, it was pretty common in the hills, wandering through the hills and being supported by the hill tribes, actually coming across monasteries that were abandoned, small monasteries where there was monks or who knows what was happening there at some point, and then they were abandoned. We found this one monastery, we came across it, it was just in the middle of nowhere, and there was a couple kutis and a sala and a Buddha image, but it had fallen into disrepair. It was in the middle of the forest. And we thought we would stay the night there, and I went into one of the kutis and it was just totally run down, and there was like moldering books stacked in it, and trying to imagine what had happened there. So that's a contemplation of impermanence. Or trees, just the way the trees in the forest, they're always changing. Trees are always growing up, and then there's trees that fall, and then they're gone. So the forest is always shifting and changing. And when we had the original plans of this particular cloister area, then there was, the trees were made note of. Debbie did a lot of the early surveying, and then there were trees that were noted. So there was this Indian walnut tree that's right outside of where the entry to the lay annex is now. So there was this Indian walnut tree, and then just further along than that, there's these 2 black oak trees. And I remember looking at these plans with Debbie, and they were from the early days. They were from like 1999 or something. And it noted the walnut tree, but it didn't note the 2 black oak trees that were there, and they're quite large trees. And we were trying to find where some pipelines were in relation to these trees, where these pipes were underground, and we kept trying to wonder, like, what was going on? Why weren't those trees noted? And we realized that those trees hadn't been born yet at that time. They've grown up big since that time. So the walnut tree was there, but now we have these big black oak trees, and those were probably just little sprouts coming out of the ground at that time. So of course she wouldn't have noted them because they were just little sprouts. So things are always growing, shifting, changing. So sometimes these reflections can be helpful for letting go, that we're the same, we're always growing and shifting and changing. And I'm quite appreciating these teachings of Ajahn Sona. He was bringing up some helpful imagery which helps us to really come out of ourselves and be more at ease. Metta is a practice which is helpful for bringing ourselves to a state of ease and well-being and safety, security. One of the images he brought up was the image of the marmots. So I've been to Birkin, so I know about those marmots. And they're quite cute little creatures. And one curiosity that he didn't mention in his talk, but one curiosity of these marmots is that they eat flowers. And when I read that, I got the image of this marmot with a big flower in its mouth. And they'll go around when the flowers bloom, they'll eat the tops off the flowers. And also when they throw out the flowers from the Dhamma hall, the marmots will run out and eat the flowers. And I just thought that was really strange, but kind of a good metta image, like a marmot with a flower hanging out of its mouth. And they're very, very kind of peaceful creatures. The practice is interesting that we never really know when things are going to change, when things are going to happen in the practice. That's a point that Ajahn Ñāṇiko brought up when Tanjoti Manto asked a question about the practice, and that Ajahn Ñāṇiko responding that you never really know when you're going to have an insight. It can happen anytime. If you're planting the causes and if you keep practicing, you never really know when you're going to have an insight into impermanence or when you're going to have an insight into metta. And even when you sit down in a particular meditation session, you don't really know when you're going to have an insight, and sometimes it's surprising to us when we have insights or when things happen. And this kind of harkens back to what Ajahn Sona's been saying in the talks, is that samadhi, or what we would think of as samatha, like calming practices, when the mind becomes more clear, then that's also wisdom. Wisdom manifests with that. We like to separate these things out of samatha and vipassana, but then once you develop that clarity through samatha, or through just a sense of ease and well-being, like in the reading, it's like focusing binoculars. It's not like focusing a laser. A laser is exclusive to one point, but when you focus binoculars, you see the clarity. You get to see the view very clearly. There's a Dhammapada verse that says there's no samadhi without panya. There's no panya without samadhi. So these things go together. And there's no jhana without panya. There's no panya without jhana. There's no wisdom without samadhi. There's no samadhi without wisdom. One who has both samadhi and wisdom is close to nibbana. So these things arise together. You don't just have wisdom and not samadhi. Or you could think of it like, I think it's an analogy that Luang Por used, that samadhi is like a candle and wisdom is like the flame. So if you light a wick but there's no candle there, you're just going to get a spark. But if you just have the candle, you're not going to get any light. So you need the candle and the wick. You need the candle and the flame to have light for a long time, to be able to see for a long time. So you need both of those things. It's also nice to see that people have been practicing outside. I walked up to the Chetty site and there was a couple people there, which was nice to see. I was heading out to my campsite that I've been developing, and it's quite wonderful to be sitting out there, and especially when the days are so beautiful like this and there's not too much wind, there might be a slight breeze. It can be very, very nice getting that sense of solitude and that sense of appreciation for the land, for the atmosphere and the setting that we have here. So developing that sense of solitude can be quite helpful. The Dhamma is very interesting, and sometimes in giving a talk there's a lot that comes up and it flows really easily, and then sometimes it just not so much comes up, so not so much more is coming up, so I'll just leave it there this evening.